We are really honored today to have Janice Way, who is the president of Leadership Kentucky. And I encountered Janice through a podcast that Dr. Webb was doing called Appalachia Rising. And I was just so impressed by Janice's just vision and what she's doing. I said, wow, this is a person. And turns out I was really late to the party. Like everyone else knew the secrets and wonders of Janice, but I was new to it. So I was excited. But let me just tell you a little bit more if you don't know about Janice. She is a graduate, an 87 graduate Leadership Kentucky program, and has served as the president since 2015. Previously, she worked with St. Elizabeth Healthcare in Northern Kentucky, where she was the assistant vice president of development. During her 25 years there at St. Elizabeth and at the St. Luke hospitals, she served as the director of public relations, marketing, supervised community and legislative relations, and led the St. Luke Community Foundation's vice president. She's also served as a member of the board of Northern Kentucky Chamber of Commerce and is a member and former chair of the Northern Kentucky Board of KET. So Janice, we really appreciate your time for being with us today.
Well, Rob, thank you so much. And I'm just delighted. I feel like I'm home. We were doing a little pre chat there. And I said, I was in Pikeville over the weekend. Then I drove back to Kentucky, Northern Kentucky, to do this talk with you today. But I do, yes, I'm from Pikeville. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But I also want to say I'm very humbled and honored to be asked to do this. And to have Dr. Roberts and Governor Patton and maybe others have joined us on this call is just tremendous. Graduates of Leadership Kentucky, Dr. Webb, Dr. Roberts, David Hutchins in the development office, and of course, Governor Patton was one of the founders that helped Leadership Kentucky get off the ground. So I could really just stop right there and let them do the talking because I've learned so many leadership lessons from them. But since I have 30 minutes to fill, I guess I'll go ahead and get started. So as Rob told you, I grew up in Pikeville and Island Creek, for those of you who know a lot about the area. And I knew from the time probably I was in middle school that I wanted a career in communications. I just felt that it was a way to share an important message. And one of the most important messages I wanted to share was how wonderful Eastern Kentucky is and all of the great things that are going on there and the people who are just the most tremendous in the country. And so I decided that in about middle school, and I was fortunate right after I graduated from high school to get a job at WPKE. And I worked there through my 4 years at EKU and through my graduate work at the University of Michigan. I would come home when I could on the weekends and the summers and vacation, and they were very nice to let me continue to work there for 5 years or so. And then after I graduated, my first full-time job in that picture in the lower right there is as a public affairs producer and director at Kentucky Educational Television. From then I went to Channel 27 and was there for a couple of years. And then we launched WYMT. And I have to say that that was one of my career highlights from my middle school dream to be able to help launch the TV station in Eastern Kentucky was just a dream fulfilled. And then from there went on to Knoxville and actually became a medical reporter, which led to all of the stuff that Rob read earlier about my work in the hospital as public relations and fundraising. But, I think all of us would probably say, though we talk about our careers, our passions are really our families. And a couple of pictures there of my family. I have 3 boys, two wonderful daughters-in-law, and a girlfriend, and a brand new grandbaby. So I talk occasionally about them in my leader remarks because I have learned as much from my boys as they've probably learned from me over the years, which is the point that you can be a leader no matter what your age, no matter what your title. You don't even have to have a title. Leadership is about who you are and the values that you instill in others. So you may be asking, okay, you're talking about Leadership Kentucky. What's Leadership Kentucky? I'll go in depth more later, but in a highlight, we offer 4 programs now, and all of them except Bright are statewide programs. But the most important thing is we create a network of engaged leaders, and hopefully they use those relationships to influence positive changes in their communities, their organizations, and throughout the state of Kentucky. So, what is leadership? There are more explanations and ideas of what leadership is, as I said before. Than you couldn't live long enough to read all the books on leadership. But who doesn't love Dolly Parton? I think she takes everything and just boils it down into a nutshell. And she says, if your actions create a legacy that inspires others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are an excellent leader. And she grew up, I'm sure most of you have heard her story. She grew up in Appalachia in East Tennessee, and she was very, very poor. She talks openly about how poor her family was, but they had a lot of love, and she had a lot of determination, and she knew that she had a gift and she wanted to share it with others. And I think we could just, as I said earlier, we could just stop right now and say, okay, Dolly, you've isolated exactly what leadership is. But leadership is about inspiring others to do well, being self-determined enough to do it on your own, but bringing others along with you, inspiring others to be a part of the change. So, some other thoughts about leadership. What can I do to improve my organization, myself, my family, and taking others along, as I said earlier? The most important thing I want to say about leaders is they don't set out to be a leader. You don't go through school thinking, I'm going to be a leader. True leaders set out to make a difference. They want to help others. They have a goal. They want to inspire others to come along with them on that goal. It's not about what title can I attain in my life. It's what difference can I make in my life. And I think the attitude is the whole point of leadership. My dad was a World War II veteran. He was at some of the major engagements like the invasion of Normandy. And he talked a lot about it in his later years. And he talked a lot about leadership, ironically. And he talked about these 2 generals here, Dwight Eisenhower on your left and James Gavin, who you probably haven't heard as much about, on your right. And he said, they had 2 very different styles, both very effective, but both very different. But they both did the same thing. They engaged others, they inspired others. And he said, Dwight Eisenhower, he was more strategic. He stayed, in the offices they had, and he looked at the strategies and called shots on a lot of the invasions. James Gavin was there with the men. And he was in the trenches, and he was in the 82nd Airborne and dropped out of the helicopters with some of these guys, the planes. And my dad said that he had so much admiration for James Gavin because he said he was right there with you. He would never have asked any of his soldiers to do anything that he wouldn't have done. And he said his men would have followed him anywhere, and they did, because they knew that he believed in what he was doing, and he was right there with them. And I think sometimes we need to remember that the best way to lead is to be right there next to people, not in front, telling everybody what to do, but being alongside them and bringing them along with you. And as I said, leaders are not about titles. You might lead a team at the university, in one of your classes, a work group. You might chair a committee for the PTA. Maybe you're just organizing meal shares for a sick family member. That's all leadership. And it's about caring, and it's about determination. The leadership guru, John Maxwell, says, I'm going to look down and read this: people follow courage and passion, not titles. The position does not make the leader. The leader makes the position. And I also want to add to that that followers are important. We talk all the time about being a good leader, but we don't talk about being a good follower. Everybody can't be a leader. If you've got 10 people on a committee, everybody can't lead the committee. Some people have to be team members. They have to follow, they have to do what they're assigned to do. And I think we ebb and flow throughout our career, throughout our committees, throughout our lives. Sometimes we're the leaders and sometimes we're the followers. So I hasten to say, let's not talk so much about leadership that we forget how important it is to have followers, to have people who help you achieve that vision, that inspiration that you're trying to bring others to. And this has been attributed to several people, but I think it's very, very important. We need to always remember, in whatever organization we're a part of, that the housekeeping staff is as important as the administrative staff. Everybody brings an important element to the table, and we must respect all of them and bring their value and their talents to the table. It's not about titles, it's about working together to accomplish a mission. So many of you probably already know this story, maybe more about the story than I do. And Governor Patton, feel free to jump in there when I say something wrong or add to it. But I wanted to share some stories of leadership that are not always easy. Leaders usually don't have an easy path. And Mayor William Hamley there in Pikeville certainly did not have an easy path. He had a vision back in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. He got tired of hearing about the flooding and the floods ruining Pikeville. Basically every 20 years we had a flood in Pikeville, and it ruined so many buildings and so many homes. And he had this vision because he actually was an engineer. In addition to being a surgeon and the mayor, he had an engineering background. And he visualized cutting that hill in half and rerouting the railroad, the highway, the river. And people thought, frankly, they thought he was nuts. They thought that it was just the craziest idea ever. But he had a vision and he persevered. And it took 17, 18 years to accomplish it, but he accomplished the dream. And you think of that opened in 1987. And knock on wood, though we've had a lot of flooding around there, we have not had a flood in downtown Pikeville since that cut through opened. And at the time, it was the second largest earth moving project in the world, next to the Panama Canal. And what I want to say about Dr. Hamley, first of all, is he did incur a lot of criticism, but he stayed the course and he brought others along with him that had that vision. The other thing I'd like to share about this Dr. Hamley story is the importance of relationships. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But, as I say, Governor Patton, and I know others probably on the call know much more about this than I do. But it was the relationships that he made when he was away in college. I believe he went to Notre Dame. And then later he worked at a hospital in Chicago for a while. And he got to know a man named Everett Dirksen, who later became Senator Everett Dirksen and had so much control over appropriations and revenue. And that relationship that he had many years earlier in Chicago helped him to get the funding to create this Pikeville Cut-Through project. So relationships you're making today, or that you made 10 years ago or 20 years ago, might help you down the road. Relationships are so important. Vision is important. Determination and steadfastness is important as well. Another very interesting story, and I'm choosing some Eastern Kentucky stories that you've probably heard of, is Mary Brackenridge. Who would have thought of Mary Brackenridge as a leader? She was a young woman who, her children died. She later got a divorce, and she felt that she had no role. She didn't know what her future held. So she went traveling in Europe. And she learned about this American Committee for a Devastated France. And she learned about what nurse midwives do and how important they are to the healthcare process. And she brought that idea back to Appalachia. And she started the Frontier Nursing Service. Now, this was back in the early 1900s. They delivered the first baby in 1925, and they rode around on horseback to some of the most remote areas in eastern Kentucky to provide health care. And you think about this, a young woman in the early 1900s, no husband, her children had died, but instead of feeling sorry for herself, which I'm sure she did spend plenty of time doing that, which is very understandable, but she took her time and her resources and she learned something new and she brought it back to care for the people in Eastern Kentucky. Now, this lady is from Mississippi. Her name's Osceola McCoy. And I just learned about her a few years ago, but I love this story. So she was a young woman, very smart young lady, apparently, and loved school. But when she was sixth grade, I believe it was, her aunt became very, very sick. So she dropped out of school to help her sick aunt. And subsequently, after that, her mother died, her sister died, and of course, her aunt had died. And she was a young woman basically all alone. And she fortunately inherited a very small house from her family, but she started doing wash for people. Here again, this is the early 1900s. And she started doing wash and ironing for some of the richest people in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And they paid her, and she saved every penny that she earned. She had a little black and white TV that finally people convinced her to get, I guess, in the 1960s. She didn't want anything to do with air conditioning, but she saved every penny that she made. And she was so respected by the people in that community because she did such a great job. She treated everybody's laundry like it was her own, and she developed great friendships. And her banker, who actually, I think she did his laundry for him, came to her one day and said, "Do you realize how much money you have? I think you should do something helpful for other people." And so, subsequently talking, they decided that because she didn't have any family, that she would leave the majority of her money to Southern Mississippi University to start a scholarship to help other people have the advantage that she wasn't able to have herself. She loved education, so she wanted to do something to help education for other young people in the Mississippi area. I'm not sure the exact amount. I think it ended up being about $150,000 that she donated to start a scholarship. So later on in the late 1990s, she was given this President's Citizenship Medal by President Clinton at the time. And then he invited her to be one of the people whose hand was on the ball drop on New Year's Eve in Times Square. And she was 90 years old about when this happened. And that was the first time she'd ever flown on a plane, the first time she'd stayed in a hotel. But what a leader she is, what a leader she was, because her legacy will continue for decades to come through the scholarship that she donated to Southern Miss and the students that will be helped because of her vision and her leadership. This is a lady, Henrietta Cleveland. I know a little bit about her because she was the founder of St. Elizabeth, where I worked for 25 years. And just like Mary Brackenridge, she lost her husband and two children when she was in her early 30s. And she was looking around thinking, what's my life's mission? What can I do? What meaning can I have to my life? And she was traveling around in Covington where she lived, and she saw so many sick and poor people who had no health care. So she went to the Diocese of Covington and asked the bishop if she could raise the money, can I start a hospital? And he said yes, he would provide some nuns to help her. So she raised about $2,000. Now, this was in the late 1850s. and bought an old storefront, and they opened the hospital on January 23rd, 1863. I'm sorry, 1861, just 3 months before the Civil War started. And that first year, they cared for 78 patients. Many of them were soldiers, both Union and Confederate soldiers. So now, 150, 60 years later, St. Elizabeth has grown to 10,000 associates, 1,200 doctors. It's just really grown in magnitude because of that one woman's vision. Here again, an unlikely leader. So, some qualities of leadership, and there are so many. Like I said, you couldn't live long enough to read all the leadership books. But I like to go back to the basics when I talk about leadership. And I think that we have a tendency to overlook those and the importance of those sometimes. I love this quote by Larry King, and there's several versions of it attributed to different people, but he says, "I remind myself every morning, nothing I say this day will teach me anything. If I'm going to learn, I must do so by listening." And those of you who know about Larry King know that he had a successful radio and television career for decades. And what he was a good listener. He asked simple questions and then he listened. So I urge everyone, especially younger students that I talk to sometimes, is listen. Learn to listen, not just to respond, but listen to learn, listen to understand, listen to other people's ideas, because you don't have all the answers. No one has all the answers. That's why we need each other. That's why teams are more successful than individual people. You listen, you work together, you come up with the best ideas, and then you formulate those as a team and move forward. But listening is a very undervalued leadership skill, in my opinion. I would also say be mindful of your speaking habits. I know many of you on this call, I can see who you are. You're expert leaders and could teach you nothing about leadership skills as far as speaking. But I do think all of us have a tendency every now and then to use some disclaimers that maybe undercut our confidence and others' confidence in us. Try not to, when we can, start out, "I'm not sure about this, but," or "I don't know if this will work. However," I think people sometimes do that because they want to be respectful and not seem like a know it all. But be very careful about how you speak sometimes. Not, "Does this make sense?" but rather, "What do you think? Give me your opinions." That's a much more confident way of speaking. And we all have a tendency to go, well, sometimes. I think that we have to be very, very careful to watch our speaking habits. And I would also add to this, we have a whole new element of speaking now, and that's through social media. And as I said earlier, I've learned so much about leadership through my boys. And I remember when one of them was in high school, he was a pretty decent athlete. And he would look at social media and he would say, "I just can't believe the things that people post on social media about our game or players or coaches." He said, "People wouldn't say that if they were looking at you in the face. So why do they say it on social media?" And I think that is such a good point. Be very mindful of what you post on social media. It can come back to bite you, and it can also be very harmful and hurtful to other people. I think we can hide behind a computer screen or our iPhones and say some very hurtful things. And I think that we really need to get back to a mindset of civility and respect. Um, so it's not just what we say out loud, it's what we put on social media. The other thing I think is people around you really matter. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree and birds of a feather flock together. How many of your parents said those things to you when you were younger? And I think that's true. I think you want to really look at those around you. You want a group that really boosts you up, that tells you the truth, that helps you see the truth in what you're doing when you stumble. They will tell you about it, but they're there to support you. They want to see you succeed. And if you don't have that, reach out and find it. There's people all around you, right there on campus, in Pikeville, in your families that want to be of help. And be a team player. Get in a good circle, be a team player. Sometimes you'll be the leader, sometimes you'll be the follower, but be a part of a team and find a good team. The other thing, this goes back to the story I was telling earlier about Dr. Hambly. Never underestimate the power of networks. Everybody you meet, I feel like you meet them for a purpose. Somewhere that relationship can help you or them or a project you're working on. I know COVID has taken a real bite out of our ability to be with other people. And I'm so looking forward to, after everybody gets vaccinated, to being back out there and being around people again, because we can talk on Zoom all day, but it's not like being in the same room with you. I think we've come to a new normal now so that we are more comfortable with virtual discussions, but it still is not like being out there talking with each other. So spend time networking with your internal and external partners. Here again, listen to people talk, listen to them talk about what's important to them, what their vision is, and who they have contacts with. And then you can reach out and to those people when you need to leverage that relationship for a project that you're working on. I know, believe it or not, growing up there on Island Creek, I was pretty intimidated and very quiet and very much the introvert. And it took me a long time to come out of that. And I noticed that I set small goals for myself. I thought, by the time I was in middle school and I decided I wanted a career in communications, an introvert, it's kind of hard for an introvert to do that. So when I would go places, I would make my goal. I was in a big room, let's say a chamber event there in Pikeville. Make a goal of meeting 2 people. That's all. Don't go in this room of 500 people and think, oh, I'm overwhelmed. It's overwhelming for almost anyone to enter a room of 500 people. But think, I'm going to meet 2 people tonight at this event. And that's all. I'm not going to worry if I meet anybody else. It's icing on the cake, but 2 people. But I'm going to get to know those 2 people and I'm going to listen to them and I'm going to share with them. And I think after you do that a few times, you can really grow your self-confidence. And I think networking is you just can't say enough about the importance of relationships and networks. And here's something that I really struggle with is stop worrying about being liked by everybody. If you are a leader, if you're a follower, it's virtually impossible for everyone to like you. People just have different interests, and it doesn't matter what those are and what's right or wrong. They just don't like everybody. And people who really go out there and do something and jump in the arena and try to make change, they are going to have adversaries. But you have to believe in yourself. You have to follow your dreams. I'm going to throw out, another sports quote here. Vince Lombardi says, leaders aren't born, they're made. And they're made like anything else through a lot of hard work and sometimes through turmoil and things that don't go your way. That's the price you have to pay to achieve any goal, is a lot of hard work, determination, falling down and getting back up. So be strong. Things to remember is, you may encounter many defeats. And if you do anything, you will. The only people who don't make mistakes are the people who stay home and do nothing. If you go out there and you really try to make a difference in the world, you will encounter defeats. You will make mistakes, and some of them might be big ones, but you just have to pick yourself up and keep going. I love this Maya Angelou quote. You may encounter many defeats, but you must not become defeated. In fact, it may be necessary to encounter those defeats so you can learn more about who you are and how to overcome those mistakes. I love Thomas Edison said, I learned 2,999 ways not to make a light bulb. I think it was like his 3,000th attempt that he finally figured out how a light bulb works. So I think we just have to keep remembering that. So I think the other thing, and it doesn't matter how old you are, start thinking about your legacy. In our young professionals program, and some of them are as young as 21, we talk to them about creating your legacy. And that's kind of a shocker for people who are that young. But people are already starting to formulate their opinions about what they think of you. And legacy is more about who you are rather than what you do. Do people think of you in a respectful fashion? Do they think that you're a person of integrity? Do you keep your word? And if you promise somebody something, do you follow through with it? And if you can't, do you call them and say, I promised that I was going to do this for you, but I'm not going to be able to, and here's why. But think about your legacy. It's not necessarily that, I want to be a TV reporter. My legacy is that I tried to help people, that hopefully I was a person of integrity. And, the whole Eastern Kentucky thing that I said at the beginning of our talk here, I really started out wanting to be in communications because I wanted to build up the Eastern Kentucky Appalachia region, and I still do. And one of our programs is really working on that. So I think, determine what your legacy is and then move forward to being the kind of person that you want to become. So we've talked a little bit about leadership values, a lot of these here, and those are the kinds of things that we talk about in Leadership Kentucky. So here again, Governor Patton or Dr. Roberts, you've been through the program or helped to develop the program, so feel free to interrupt me and chime in here. And anybody else who's joined the group. But Leadership Kentucky was created in 1984 as a nonprofit educational organization. And actually, at that time, there were only 3 other statewide leadership programs in the country. So Leadership Kentucky is very much the pioneer. And it was started, the idea for it was started by 4 people in their 20s. And some names that you probably hear of and know very much about today, but Bob and Laura Babbage and Dave Atkinson, who just retired recently as the president of the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. But they were in their 20s and they got this idea for the exact reason that Leadership Kentucky still exists today. And that is, we have to bring East and West together so that they understand each other more, and North and South, and especially Louisville and Lexington. Governor Patton, I'll mention that a few years ago, I heard you speak in Louisville. You didn't even know I was there. And you were talking about this rural-urban divide. And you said that's why programs like Leadership Kentucky is so important because, if you live in Pikeville, you probably drive to Lexington every now and then for shopping, entertainment, whatever. If you live in Owensboro or Paducah, you're likely to drive to Louisville. Lexington and Louisville are less likely to leave those communities and drive to Pikeville or drive to Paducah. So this program is so important to bring people from all over the state together so that they can learn from each other, they can learn about their communities, they can see what's working in one community and take it to another community and try to make it successful there. Because when one part of the state rises up, it helps all. We need to work together as a Commonwealth and try to help each other. And that's what Leadership Kentucky tries to do. It brings relationships together among people who would have never had a chance to know each other or meet each other before. So anyway, it's a 7-month program. It runs June through December. We're taking applications now for about 2 more weeks if anybody is interested in participating in the program. And as you know, there's several people there at UPike that can tell you more about Leadership Kentucky. A few years ago, we started a new program called Elevate, and this is one of our young professionals programs. It's basically for about 25 to 35, but it's not a strict age limit. If you're an excellent candidate and you're 23, that's fine. And if you're 40 and want to participate, that's fine too. But we talk a lot about leadership skill development in that program. It's 3 months. In fact, it'll start next month. We're in the process of reaching out to this year's class right now and getting them started. It runs April, May, and June. So that's Elevate. New Executives to Kentucky, we started that about 5 years ago. And this is a one-day program that's actually free of charge. And it's for senior level executives who are new to the Commonwealth. In fact, Dr. Webb participated in this program a few years ago. But it's one day. You come to Frankfort, and we try to show you everything political and cultural in one day. You hear from the governor, you hear from cabinet secretaries, and then we try to do some cultural things. We take you to a bourbon distillery and a horse farm. So you learn a little bit more about the culture of Kentucky, and we talk about the other parts of the state as well. But it's one day and it's free of charge thanks to our wonderful sponsors. So if you know someone moving into Pikeville that would be good for that program, please let us know. And this new program that we were talking a little bit about just as everybody jumped on the call, and that's Bright Kentucky. And Bright is the new young professionals leadership program that we started in 2019 to develop the skill sets of the next generation leaders in Appalachia, the 54 counties of the ARC in Kentucky. And most of them are Eastern Kentucky, of course, but some shift a little bit west to Central Kentucky. But Bright has exceeded any expectation that we had for that program. We've had 86 participants now. First year was a little larger than, of course, last year's class. We had to have a smaller class size due to COVID and to accomplish social distancing. You see that picture there. That's graduation, how spread out they are at their graduation with masks on and everything. But it's just a tremendous program. And right now, it's offered free of charge because we got an ARC grant and some private funding, but that funding ends at the end of this year. So we are in a major effort now to continue to raise funds to keep this program going. It has been such a game changer, and there's so many projects that have come out of that are making a real difference already in the communities of Eastern Kentucky. And, here's an example, again, of people who would have never met had it not been for this program. But when the pandemic started last year and students were doing all of their classes online from home, a lot of people don't have good broadband. I don't need to tell you all that. Broadband's a real issue, and not just Eastern Kentucky, but many places, but, especially Eastern Kentucky. And Mayor Les Stapleton down in Prestonsburg, he opened up, and I don't know exactly how he did it, but he boosted the Wi-Fi around the Max Center and invited families to come in. And I guess he staggered a few at a time so as not to overload, but they were able to come there and let their kids sit in the cars and use the Wi-Fi to do homework and turn in homework assignments. And someone in the Bright program that was from that region posted that to some of the other they have their Facebook groups and their private groups where they talk with each other. And he posted that, and several communities around Eastern Kentucky started to do that to help the families in those regions. Well, without Bright and without those relationships and without those people having met, they would not have known that. So that was just one really quick, immediate, but very important asset to this program. There's so many, I could go on for hours because you can tell I really like this Bright program. But anyway, those are the 4 programs of Leadership Kentucky. And, I'll end up with a couple of quotes here. Individual commitment to a group effort. That's what makes a team work, a company work, a society work, a civilization work. And I told you I like Vince Lombardi quotes. But also I love this quote by Margaret Mead. And she said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, concerned citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And it has from the beginning of time, and it will till the end of time." People, here again, determined, thoughtful, listening, plan. That's what changes the world. So I'll stop now, and I encourage others to jump in with thoughts or questions. Rob, I'll throw it back to you.
This was great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your insights and sharing a couple of those stories of leaders who really made a change. I had a question. You had talked about how, leaders really have to have this sense that you're not going to be liked by everybody. And, sometimes I have like a jealousy because I feel like sometimes people are more like wired for that than others, and people pleasers really struggle with that. But I do intellectually understand to make a difference, there are going to be waves created. Could you share any insight you might have for those who maybe aren't as wired to, especially in the kind of the deeply polarized moments of where one little misfire on social media could really cost you a job? What do you say to people who are trying to stand up in the midst of maybe that kind of tense environment?
Well, I'm probably not the best one to answer that question because probably of all of those leadership tips there that I just shared, that's the hardest one for me. I I want people to like me, and not because they agree with me necessarily, but I want them to understand that I'm coming from a place of genuine concern. I might say it the wrong way, I might make a mistake, but my heart is in the right place. And if somehow along the way, when you make those mistakes or you know that somebody doesn't like you, if you can have the courage to reach out to those people and say, I think you're misunderstanding my intentions here. Sounds like we're not on the same page. We're not in agreement, but here's where I'm coming from. Tell me about where you're coming from, and let's see if we can come to a consensus. You have to acknowledge the obvious. Ignoring it does not make it go away. On the other hand, if you're being bombarded all over social media about a mistake you made, you can't reach out individually to every one of those people. But I think most importantly is I think if people know that your heart is in the right place, and most importantly, if you know your heart is in the right place, then I think that's how I've lived with mistakes that I've made over the years. And, the other important thing I think is help others to learn from the mistakes you made and try to develop a little thicker skin themselves.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions that we might have today?
Janice, I'd like to ask a question.
Okay.
Or for you to share some comments. You provided excellent examples in your presentation about both men and women who have found opportunities to serve in healthcare, such as St. Elizabeth or the lady in Mississippi or Dr. Hamley. Would you comment on either the challenges or opportunities you've had as a woman or the role that gender plays in leadership?
I think there are inherent obstacles sometimes. And I think some people have felt it more than others. And I think it's very real. I do feel, though, that, I grew up in Eastern Kentucky, and I think there is a work ethic and a spunk that comes from that. I was talking with somebody over the weekend about the work ethic. I grew up on a farm there with my mom and dad working, from sunrise to sunset, in addition to their real jobs. They also did their farm work. And so I guess, kind of like I was saying about Dolly Parton at the beginning, I had such a determination that I didn't really think a whole lot about it. I mean, I encountered some of the situations that women talk about. Some were unpleasant, and somehow I managed to maneuver around them. But they are real. But I also think that men encounter issues as well, and I think you just have to stay true to who you are and stay determined that I'm not going to let this be a stumbling block for me.
Thank you very much.
Come on, Governor Patton, you've got some words of wisdom I'm sure you want to share.
Okay. Well, very informative, and leadership is, as you know, as I speak with leadership, leadership is a combination of talent and training. So I couldn't be a good basketball player. It don't matter what Nick Pitino or anybody would do. I just didn't have the natural talent. I probably had some natural leadership talents, which would have been made better had I had the opportunity to participate in these programs. But natural ability, natural talent can be enhanced by a more formal training program that Leadership Kentucky offers.
Thank you. Yeah, and they say leadership. In fact, I think I've heard you say this on several occasions. Leadership is not for the faint of heart. But the other thing, and to your point there, that I would also like to throw out real quickly as we conclude, is work to your strengths. People always talk about, hi, Lori, I just saw you popped on down there. I think people always talk about how to overcome your weaknesses. And we all have our weaknesses. Like the governor, I couldn't be a basketball player if I tried all day, if I worked 23 hours a day. I might could get a few shots off every now and then, but not successfully. I think what we really need to remember is whatever your strengths are, enhance those. And the things that you're not good at, your weaknesses, that's what you rely on your team for. Surround yourself with people who have strengths that you don't have. That's what makes a team work. So good point. It's leadership, it's training, but it's also knowing your strengths and really working to them.
Well, Janice, we really appreciate your time. This is really helpful. And I know that some of the students, maybe from Howard and Hannah's course, may have some questions. So I appreciate you putting your contact information. There may be some questions from our students that come along. So a lot for us to think about. I do invite you back next week. Next week, we're going to celebrate St. Patrick's Day with Dr. Philip Freeman, the other Dr. Freeman. He's from Pepperdine University. He's a classics scholar, has written multiple books. He's written a book on St. Patrick, and I thought it'd be great for us to look at the great St. Patrick. So we'll see you next week. Thanks so much. Bye.
Janice.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Janice.
Bye. Hi, Dr. Webb and Larry. I just saw you were on there.
Yeah, it's a few minutes late. I'm here though.
Yeah, I got here about 5 minutes late too, but I had John and was listening the whole time. So great.
Okay. Well, it's hard to look at who all's on the call and talk and everything else. So I'm glad you were joining us too. So
Great job, Janice. Thank you.
thank you. Hey, Lori, I was going to ask you, are you interested in the leadership program this year? We're accepting applications for 2 more weeks.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I will give it some really serious thought. It's been a crazy year. But
Sure
travel
have.
may be a little bit easier looking forward. Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate it a
Okay.
lot.
Well, so good to see everybody. I hope I did okay. And Lori, just let us know. You guys talk about it and see if this is
Good.
for you and let us know.
Thank you so much. Thanks,
Thanks,
Rob.
Janice.
Guys,
Bye.
see you.
Have a
Bye.
good day. Thanks, Rob.
See you. Thank you, Janice.